Jonathan Blake had always believed in control. From the first breath of his carefully constructed mornings to the last email sent before sleep, his life was a blueprint of discipline. He rose at 5, ran 5 miles by 6, and closed multimillion-dollar deals before most of the city had even touched their coffee. His world was made of polished steel, dark suits, luxury silence, and numbers, so many numbers. They behaved, unlike people. They followed logic. They produced results. At 42, Jonathan was the CEO of Axis FinTech, one of the fastest-growing private tech companies in the Midwest. He lived in a penthouse overlooking downtown Chicago, drove a matte black electric Jaguar, and dined at restaurants where reservations took 6 months and the appetizers cost more than most families' groceries for a week. Everything about him, his crisp navy suit, his minimalist leather briefcase, his watch worth a mid-sized sedan, spoke of success. Controlled, calculated success. That afternoon, as summer heat shimmered over the city, Jonathan sat in his usual booth at Le Pave, an elite French bistro tucked between 2 high-rise office towers on LaSalle Street. He was reviewing a merger document on his tablet, AirPods in his ears, taking a call with a hedge fund executive in Manhattan. The deal was worth over $20 million. He didn't blink. "I need a final answer, John," the voice on the line said. "We're not dragging this out." Jonathan adjusted his cufflinks. "You'll have it in 3 minutes. And if you're smart, you'll say yes when you do." Around him, the restaurant hummed with quiet opulence. Wine glasses clinked. Conversations drifted in soft French and polished English. A maitre d' in a pressed vest glided past his table. Then something interrupted the rhythm. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. In fact, it was almost invisible, except to Jonathan's peripheral vision. A shadow. Small. Barefoot. He looked up, just for a second. A little girl stood near the bar. No more than 6 years old, she wore an oversized hoodie that nearly swallowed her tiny frame. Her jeans were ripped at the knees, and her hair, a dusty brown, clung to her cheeks in uneven tangles. Her feet were blackened from the city streets. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She simply stood still, her voice a thin whisper. "Excuse-me, sir. Do you have any old bread?" The maitre d' turned, face hardening. "This is not a soup kitchen," he hissed. "Get out. Immediately. Before he call security." The girl flinched. But she didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply turned, walked toward the exit, and disappeared through the glass door. Jonathan's gaze returned to his tablet. The screen blinked. Contract ready for signature. He was about to sign when something inside him tugged. He tried to ignore it. "Jonathan?" The voice from Manhattan pressed. "I'm here," he said. He signed. The deal was done. Another trophy added to a long shelf of victories. But his thoughts weren't on the merger. They were stuck on that child's whisper. That small voice asking for stale bread. 15 minutes later, Jonathan exited the bistro, sunglasses on, phone in hand. The city roared around him, horns, sirens, footsteps on pavement. He stepped toward the curb, waiting for his car service. That's when he heard it. A voice. The same small voice. But this time, it wasn't asking. It was praying. "Thank you, God, for this bread. Please help my sister not cry tonight." Jonathan turned. The sound came from a narrow alley beside the restaurant, hidden behind a dumpster overflowing with trash bags. Hésitated. He didn't explore alleys. He didn't deal in dirt or mystery. But something made his feet move. He walked in. The smell hit him first, sour, metallic, rot. His polished loafers crunched over gravel and broken glass. The alley was dim, lit only by a flickering bulb above a service door. There she was. The same girl. Kneeling beside an overturned trash bin. In her hands, she held a piece of bread. It was crusted with mold, green and blue, blooming like poison. Yet she cradled it like treasure. Her head was bowed. Her lips moved in prayer. "Thank you, Heavenly Father, for this food." Jonathan stood frozen. He'd seen billionaires bluff and lie, seen politicians sell their souls for applause. But he had never, in all his years of power and success, seen anything so raw, so painfully sincere. The girl opened her eyes. She saw him. For a moment, neither moved. Then she clutched the bread to her chest, like she thought he might steal it. I didn't mean to scare anyone, she said quickly. I was just saying thank you.
Jonathan knelt slowly, keeping his voice low.
You're going to eat that? She nodded. It's still okay.
A little green.
But I can scrape it off. He looked closer. It wasn't a little green. It was completely rotten. His stomach turned. The girl tilted her head toward the back of the alley.
Eat first.
If I don't get sick, then my sisters can have some tomorrow. Sisters? He asked. She pointed. Behind a stack of cardboard and broken crates, two shapes moved. One was a girl of maybe 4, clutching a tattered blanket. The other, a toddler, not more than 18 months, was asleep on a flattened sleeping bag. The oldest girl looked at him, defiant. We're not going to the shelter. They'll split us up. They tried once.
You won't let that happen again.
Jonathan's chest tightened. He looked down at his tailored suit, his custom shoes, the Rolex on his wrist. Then back at her, the dirt on her face, the raw bones of her knuckles, the fierce protection in her eyes. What's your name? He asked. Ellie.
And your sisters? Lena and Ava.
He nodded. Slowly. Carefully. Would you let me get you some real food? Ellie hesitated. She looked from him to her sisters, then back to him.
Only if we eat together.
All of us.
No exception.
A lump formed in Jonathan's throat. He reached out his hand. Deal. She stared at his palm, then looked down at her moldy bread. She whispered, Can I keep it? Just in case. You can, he said. She tucked it into a plastic bag, placed it under a crate like it was a sacred relic, and stood. Then she took his hand. That was the moment everything changed. Not just for her. The city was beginning to dim as Jonathan led the girls out of the alley. The early evening sky above downtown Chicago had turned a soft, bruised purple. Traffic hummed along the streets, the buzz of urban life indifferent to the fragile scene unfolding between the cracks of its glossy surface. He held Ellie's hand, firm but gentle, while Lena trailed beside them, clinging to Ellie's hoodie with one hand and dragging her thin blanket in the other. Ava, the youngest, stirred only once as Jonathan lifted her carefully into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been. Her cheek rested against his chest, warm but slightly clammy, her small breaths uneven. Jonathan had spent years perfecting the art of power. He had stood before hostile boards, battled billion-dollar lawsuits, stared down politicians. But this walk with 3 homeless children in tow, felt more intense than any corporate war. His black SUV pulled to the curb. The driver, Davis, stepped out, eyes widening at the sight of the girls. Everything all right, sir? He asked cautiously. Jonathan didn't explain. He simply opened the rear door and gestured for Ellie and Lena to climb in. They hesitated. Ellie turned, brows knit with suspicion. Where are we going? Someplace warm, Jonathan said. And safe. Ellie didn't move. Lena whispered something only her sister could hear, her voice too soft to carry. Ellie looked up at Jonathan again, eyes searching, weighing. What if we wake up somewhere else? She asked.
What if you change your mind? Jonathan crushed, his voice quiet. I'm not changing my mind. You stay together.
All of you. Ellie bit her lip, then helped Lena into the car. Jonathan followed, still holding Ava, and they pulled away from the curb, the alley disappearing behind them. The ride was quiet at first. Lena fell asleep almost instantly, curled into a corner of the seat. Ellie sat straight-backed, eyes darting between her sisters and Jonathan. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. Ava dozed in his lap, one hand wrapped around his tie like a security blanket. When they reached his building, the concierge stepped forward but said nothing when Jonathan shook his head. He guided the girls through the gleaming lobby, past marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows. The elevator whooshed them up 60 floors to his penthouse. The doors opened to a space of glass, wood, and steel. Everything was sleek, curated, minimalist. It looked nothing like the world the girls came from. Ellie's eyes widened as she stepped inside. Is this your house? Jonathan nodded. Yes. It's like a hotel. It's home, he said quietly. He showed them the guest bedroom first, a room bigger than their entire shelter, with 2 beds, a full bath, and a walk-in closet. Lena climbed onto the bed immediately, clutching her blanket. Ellie remained near the doorway, arms crossed. Jonathan turned to the kitchen.
Are you hungry?
Yes, Ellie said. But only if my sisters eat first. He opened the fridge. It was full but cold, too clean, too unfamiliar. He ordered from room service instead, chicken tenders, soup, warm bread, orange juice, apple slices. When the food arrived, Lena sat up like she was dreaming. Ava blinked awake, staring at the tray like it might vanish. Jonathan handed Ellie a spoon and a napkin. She didn't smile, but she nodded in thanks. The girls ate slowly at first, as if the food might disappear if they moved too fast. But hunger eventually overtook hesitation.
Jonathan sat across the Islande, watching in silence.
After the meal, he fetched clean towels and new toothbrushes. He found old clothes from a donation drive his company had hosted years ago, soft sweatshirts, leggings, socks that hadn't been worn. He let them wash up, one by one. Ava came out first, wrapped in a towel like a tiny bundle. Ellie dried her hair with a hotel-grade dryer, guiding her sisters with the authority of someone twice her age. When all 3 girls were in clean clothes, full, and tucked into the guest bed, Jonathan stood at the doorway.
Ellie sat up, eyes sharp.
Are you going to call someone? She asked.
Jonathan hésitated.
Who would I call?
CPS. The shelter. The city.
That's what adults do. They take us places. They say it's for the best, but it never is. He looked at her. You've done this before. Too many times, she said. Once they almost took Ava. Said we weren't safe. I told them I'd run away. And I did.
Jonathan sat at the edge of the bed.
No one is taking anyone tonight. Ellie studied him.
Why do you care?
He opened his mouth to answer, and realized he didn't know the words yet. I don't know, he admitted. But I do. She didn't speak again.
She lay back, pulling Lena and Ava close.
Within minutes, the girls were asleep, tangled together like roots of the same tree. Jonathan stood in the dark, watching them. He went to his office, poured himself a glass of water, and sat in his leather chair facing the skyline. It should have felt like a win, another crisis managed, another situation stabilized. But it didn't feel like business. It felt like memory. He saw himself at 10, clinging to his little brother in a social worker's office, begging not to be separated. He remembered the sound of the door closing. The silence that followed. The way it carved a hole in him that nothing ever filled. He had spent his life covering that hole with titles, deals, and designer suits. But now 3 little girls were sleeping in the next room, and somehow, without knowing him, they had seen straight through the armor. He glanced at his phone. 2 missed calls from Victoria. His sister. His partner. The only family he had left. He didn't call back. Instead, he pulled up a new document on his tablet. A draft. Something he hadn't written in years. It was titled, Emergency Guardianship. He didn't know where this was going. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't let them go. Not again. Not this time. Not when it mattered. And for the first time in years, Jonathan Blake allowed himself to hope. Not for money, not for status, but for redemption.
For a second chance.
For 3 small lives asleep in his guest room. And perhaps, finally, for his own. By the time morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, the world outside had already started to turn against him. Jonathan had slept only 3 hours. The rest of the night had been spent on his office couch, alternating between reviewing legal documents and checking in on the guest room every hour. Each time he peeked in, the girls were still there, curled together, safe, silent. For now. At 6:45 a.m., his phone began to buzz. First with a call. Then another. Then a dozen messages from reporters, colleagues, and board members. His name was trending on social media. Not because of a merger or a keynote speech. But because of a grainy photo someone had snapped the night before, Jonathan Blake, CEO of Axis FinTech, holding a barefoot child in his arms as he walked into his building. The caption read, Tech billionaire brings homeless kids into his penthouse. What's going on here? Within hours, news outlets picked it up. Some painted him as a philanthropist. Others questioned his mental state. Speculations spread like wildfire. Was he running for office? Starting a charity?
Having a breakdown?
Victoria called at 7:13 a.m. He didn't answer. At 7:27, she arrived at his apartment. Jonathan opened the door before she knocked. She stood there in a tailored navy pantsuit, holding a latte in one hand and her phone in the other. Her expression was half smirk, half fury. "Well," she said, stepping in. "This is certainly a strategy."
Jonathan closed the door behind her.
"It's not a strategy."
Oh, comment jeune.
"You can't seriously expect me to believe this is some spontaneous act of compassion."
You hate children.
"You once fired a VP because her kid interrupted a Zoom call." "That was a shareholder meeting," he muttered. Victoria didn't laugh. She walked past the kitchen, peering into the hallway. "They're still here. They're asleep." She turned to face him. "You understand the implications, right? The board is panicking. Investors are calling. The press is swarming. We've spent years building a brand based on logic, precision, order, and now you've gone soft over a few orphans you found in a dumpster." Jonathan crossed his arms. "They're not orphans." "Oh, forgive me," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just unsupervised, malnourished minors hiding in an alley."
Much better.
He stared at her.
Do you hear yourself?
"I hear reality," she snapped.
This is reckless. It's dangerous.
"You're not trained for this. You're not qualified. And frankly, it looks unstable." There it was. The word she'd been aiming for since she walked in. Unstable. She didn't have to say the rest. The implication was clear. Jonathan turned away. "I'm not discussing this."
You don't have a choice.
"CPS is going to get involved. They already contacted me. Someone tipped them off. Probably that waiter who saw you leave with the girls."
Jonathan stiffened.
"You talked to CPS?" "I'm on the board of a non-profit that partners with them. They called for advice. I gave it." He didn't ask what advice she gave. He already knew. Victoria's voice softened, just slightly.
Jeune.
"I get it."
You're going through something. A midlife crisis.
Or guilt over the past. Or maybe you're trying to fix something that broke a long time ago. But this isn't the way. He didn't respond. She tried again. "You have an empire to run. A reputation to protect. These kids. They're not a project," he said quietly. "They're people. And they don't need to be fixed. They need someone who won't leave." Victoria's mask cracked just enough to reveal her frustration.
She stepped closer.
"Listen to me carefully. If you want to keep those kids, even temporarily, you'll have to step down. At least for now. We can spin it. Say you're taking a sabbatical. Focus on your personal growth." Jonathan narrowed his eyes. "And if I don't?" Her answer was instant. "I'll call CPS myself. Tell them you're endangering minors. You'll lose the company."
And the keys.
He didn't speak. Not for a long moment. Then he turned and walked past her, into the guest room. The girls were awake. Ellie sat on the bed, braiding Lena's hair while Ava played with a soft toy Jonathan had found in storage. They looked up as he entered. Ava reached her arms toward him. He lifted her gently. Ellie watched him with those sharp eyes, always reading the room. "Is everything okay?" she asked. He looked at her sisters, at the bruises life had left on their spirits. "No," he said, "but it will be." He returned to the living room. Victoria was standing near the door, arms crossed. "I'm not stepping down," he said. Her eyes hardened. "Then I'll do what I have to do." He nodded. "So will I." By noon, CPS arrived. 2 social workers and a uniformed officer stepped into the penthouse, holding clipboards and wearing cautious expressions. Jonathan had already called his attorney, Marcus Lang, who stood at his side as they entered. The social worker, a woman in her 40s named Dana, spoke first. "We received reports that 3 minors are being housed here without formal guardianship. We'll need to interview the children and assess the situation." Jonathan nodded. "You can speak to them." But not without me present. That's not standard procedure. They're traumatized, Marcus interjected. You'll be speaking to them with great care. They agreed. The interviews were conducted in the office. One by one, the girls were brought in. Ava clung to Jonathan's neck and cried when they tried to take her into the room alone. Dana relented, letting him stay. Ellie was last. She sat in the chair across from the social worker, back straight. Have you been hurt since coming here? Dana asked gently. No. Has Mr. Blake done anything to scare you? No. Why did you come here? Ellie hesitated, then said, because he didn't look away. That answer hung in the air. After the interviews, Dana stepped aside with her colleague. They spoke in hushed tones. Then returned. We're placing the children in temporary custody, she said.
Jonathan stood.
What? It's not permanent. But until there's a formal guardianship agreement or court ruling, they cannot stay here. You're tearing them apart. We're doing what's safest. For who? He snapped. The girls were already crying. Lena clutched Ellie, refusing to let go. Ava screamed when a worker tried to lift her. Jonathan tried to hold them, tried to calm them. Ellie reached for him, her voice breaking.
Don't let them take us, please.
But they did. One by one, the girls were carried out, into 3 different cars, headed for 3 different shelters. Jonathan stood in the hallway, hands clenched, jaw tight, heart breaking. Victoria's text arrived moments later.
You still have a way out.
Step down.
Sign the papers. Walk away with your money.
Or watch them disappear. Jonathan didn't reply. He walked back into the empty apartment, silence pressing in like a weight. Then he picked up the phone. Marcus, he said. We're going to court. I don't care how long it takes or how much it costs. I want them back. Because for the first time in his life, Jonathan Blake wasn't fighting for a company. He was fighting for his family. The courtroom was colder than Jonathan expected. Not in temperature, though the overhead air conditioning hummed relentlessly, but in atmosphere. The kind of cold that seeps beneath your skin, not because of the chill, but because of the tension.
The quiet.
The sterilized distance. It had been 12 days since the girls were taken. 12 days of court filings, legal consultations, and back-and-forth motions. 12 days of empty rooms, sleepless nights, and waking up every morning with a jolt, forgetting for a split second that the penthouse was silent. Jonathan had used every legal avenue available. Emergency guardianship petitions. Motions for reunification. Psychological evaluations. All while the media storm raged outside, speculating on everything from his motives to his sanity. Victoria, as expected, had fueled the fire. She arrived at court with her high-profile legal team and a carefully constructed narrative. Jonathan was unstable. Emotionally impulsive. Not fit to care for 3 traumatized children. Her attorneys submitted photos, witness testimonies, and most damning of all, a video clip. The footage showed Jonathan, weeks earlier, shouting at a security guard in his building lobby. The audio was distorted, the context missing. But the image was clear enough. A powerful man, red-faced, voice raised, finger pointed. He's volatile, Victoria's lead attorney declared. And now he's projecting unresolved trauma from his childhood onto 3 vulnerable minors. This is not guardianship, it's a delusion. Jonathan sat silently, jaw clenched, resisting every instinct to rise and defend himself. His lawyer, Marcus Lang, remained calm. When you hear the full story, Marcus told the judge, you'll understand why Mr. Blake did what he did. And why he should be allowed to continue doing it. The judge, an older woman with years of family law behind her, listened without interruption. She had a kind face, but her eyes were sharp, unflinching. The trial was set to last 3 days. 3 days to determine whether Jonathan would be granted custody, or whether Ellie, Lena, and Ava would remain in the system, possibly separated forever. On the second morning, Jonathan took the stand. He spoke plainly.
No theatrics.
No speeches. He told them about the alley.
The moldy bread.
The prayer. He told them about his past, how he and his younger brother were separated in foster care, how he never saw him again. How that moment shaped him, hardened him. How the sight of three little girls clinging to one another in the shadows of a city, he thought he knew had brought everything rushing back. "I didn't go looking for them," he said. "They found me. Or maybe, they reminded me of something I forgot I lost." Victoria's attorney tried to poke holes in his testimony. Asked if this wasn't all just guilt.
À saveur complexe.
An attempt to rewrite his own childhood through someone else's. Jonathan didn't flinch. Maybe. Or maybe it's just what decent people do when they see children starving in the street. That afternoon, Ellie was brought into the courtroom. She wore a simple dress and sat upright in the witness chair, her legs dangling, not quite reaching the floor. She didn't fidget. Didn't squirm. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly through the room. "He was the first person who didn't tell us to leave," she said. "He gave us food.
Clean cloth. A place to sleep."
The attorney questioned her, gently at first. "Did he ever scare you?"
No.
"Did he ever ask you to keep secrets?"
No.
"Why do you want to live with him?" Ellie looked at Jonathan, then back at the attorney. "Because when he looks at us, he sees people. Not problems." A hush fell over the courtroom. The second witness was Lena.
Shy, Kielena.
She clung to a stuffed rabbit and whispered most of her answers. But when asked what Jonathan did that made her feel safe, she replied, "He reads to us at night. And he always makes sure Ava's bottle is warm." No legal training in the world could prepare a courtroom for that kind of honesty. Ava was too young to testify formally. But as she was brought into the room, she squirmed out of the social worker's arms and toddled straight toward Jonathan. She raised her arms, and he picked her up. She buried her face in his shoulder and mumbled something only he could hear. The judge smiled faintly. "What did she say?"
Jonathan hésita-t-elle.
Then said, "She said I smell like pancakes." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Even Victoria looked momentarily disarmed. But the final blow came not from a witness, nor from an attorney, but from a piece of paper. It was a letter.
Handwritten.
In pencil. Found tucked into Ellie's pillow at the shelter a few nights earlier. It read, "Dear Judge.
If you make us live in different places, Ava will cry all night again. Lena will stop talking again.
And I'll stop eating again.
Monsieur.
Jonathan is not perfect. But he lets us sleep all together. And he listens. He's not like the other people. Please don't take us away from him. We don't need more new beds. We need to stay together.
Love, Ellie."
The judge took several moments to read it in full. Then she folded the letter and placed it carefully beside her bench. Victoria's team attempted one final argument, pushing the idea that Jonathan's sudden shift from executive to caregiver was irresponsible, unstable. But by then, the room had already shifted. The judge called for recess and returned an hour later with her ruling. Jonathan would be granted temporary custody of the three girls, effective immediately, with the court's full support to begin formal adoption proceedings. She looked directly at him as she spoke. "You took a risk, Mr. Blake. One many wouldn't. But it wasn't reckless. It was human. And sometimes, what the law needs most is not more policies, but more people willing to care."
Ellie burst into tears.
Lena grabbed her hand. Ava clapped and shouted something about snacks. Jonathan sat still for a moment, stunned. Then he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for 12 days. As they left the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed.
Question floue.
But he didn't stop. He held Ellie's hand. Lena held his jacket. Ava, as always, rested in his arms. He didn't need to say anything. Their presence beside him was louder than any statement. Later that night, as they returned to the penthouse, the silence felt different. Not hollow. Whole. Jonathan stood in the kitchen, watching the girls dance around the living room in mismatched socks, music playing low in the background. His phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Victoria. "Enjoy it while it lasts.
The world forge fast.
But I don't." He deleted the message without replying. Because for once, he wasn't building something for investors, or headlines, or approval. He was building a home. And it no longer mattered who understood it. It only mattered that three little girls finally did. 1 year later, the alley where it all began didn't look the same. The cracked concrete had been repaved. The dumpsters were gone. In their place stood a long rectangular building with wide windows and golden light spilling onto the sidewalk. Painted above the door in hand-lettered script were 5 words that hadn't existed here before.
The Bread et Light Café.
It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a promise. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of baked bread, simmering soup, and cinnamon. Laughter echoed off brightly painted walls, now covered in murals, flowers, birds, sunrises, and in the corner, a child kneeling with hands folded in prayer over a piece of bread. Jonathan Blake stood just inside the doorway, dressed simply in a soft button-down and rolled-up sleeves, watching as volunteers bustled between tables. Some wore aprons. Others carried trays of food. But none moved with the indifference of hired help. Everyone here had chosen to be part of something that mattered. The grand opening had begun only an hour earlier, and already the café was full, children and parents, teachers and elderly neighbors, people in suits and people with no homes at all.
No one paid for anything.
There were no prices, no menus, no receipts. Just food. And dignity. At the center of it all, 3 girls moved among the guests like they belonged. Because they did. Ellie, now 7, wore a yellow sundress and a lanyard that read Junior Volunteer. She handed out books from a small shelf near the back, helping a younger child spell the word friend. Lena, 6, had grown out of her silence and now stood beside the soup station, offering crackers and her favorite line, "It's extra warm today." Like hugs. And Ava, nearly 3, ran back and forth between tables with a basket of bread rolls, her curls bouncing, shouting, "No green bread.
Only fresh bread here."
Jonathan smiled as he watched them, heart swelling with something he still hadn't found the right word for. Not pride. Not joy.
Something deeper.
Something earned. He hadn't planned to build a cafe. It had started as a simple idea. What if the place where Ellie was once turned away could become a place where no child was? What if a space built for exclusivity could be reborn as a place of welcome? He had approached the owner of Le Pave with an offer. Not to buy the building for profit, but for purpose. The man had laughed. Then he had accepted. Construction had taken 6 months. The design team had argued against removing the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the imported decor. But Jonathan insisted. The place had to feel different. It had to reflect what it stood for. It had to feel like home. Today, the old chandeliers were gone. In their place hung mason jars with soft bulbs. Wooden beams lined the ceiling. Every table had mismatched chairs, and every child who walked in was greeted by name, if not yet, then by the time they left. A woman approached Jonathan now, holding her son by the hand. Her coat was frayed. Her face tired. "You're the one who started this?" she asked softly. "I suppose," he said. Her son clung to her side, wide-eyed. She hesitated, then said, "My boy hadn't had a warm meal in 2 days. I didn't know where else to go. Then someone told me about this place." Jonathan knelt so he could look the child in the eyes. "What's your name?" he asked.
"Tommy," the boy whispered.
"Well, Tommy," Jonathan said.
"You came to the right place. We're glad you're here."
Tommy smiled.
"Just barely."
But it was enough. As they moved toward a table, a small hand slipped into Jonathan's. It was Ellie. "They liked the soup," she whispered. "And Ava gave him 3 rolls. She said one was for later." Jonathan looked at her. "You doing okay?" She nodded. "This place feels like us. Like who we used to be." "No," she said. "Like who we are now." That night, after the guests had gone and the lights had dimmed, the cafe quieted. A few volunteers lingered to mop floors and clear tables. But most had left, their shifts ending with tired smiles and warm goodbyes. Jonathan sat at one of the tables, a steaming mug of tea in front of him. The girls gathered around him, as they always did. Lena crawled into his lap. Ellie leaned against his side. Ava, fighting sleep, rested her head on his arm. Outside, the city kept moving. But here, time slowed. He looked around the cafe, the soft lighting, the colorful walls, the smell of bread still lingering in the air. It had been a year of challenges. The court hearings had continued for months, each step toward full adoption met with questions and paperwork and skepticism. Victoria had fought until the bitter end, claiming he was sacrificing his legacy for a fleeting obsession. But in the end, she lost more than the case. She lost the right to call herself his sister. Jonathan had signed the adoption papers 3 months ago.
The ink was DRY.
The names were official. They were his daughters now.
Not by blood,
but by choice. And choice, he had learned, was the most powerful bond of all. He thought back to that first night. To a girl with dusty hair and scraped knees, holding moldy bread like treasure. To a prayer whispered behind a dumpster. He thought about how close he'd come to walking away. And how grateful he was that he hadn't.
Ellie spoke, breaking the silence.
Do you think the cafe will always be here? As long as we need it, he said.
What if other kids come?
Lena asked. Like us. Then we'll feed them.
Ava sat up, sleepy-eyed.
And give them beds. Jonathan smiled. And books. And hugs. And warm soup. Ava nodded solemnly.
No green bread. Never again.
They laughed, soft and full. The kind of laugh that only happens when you know you're safe. Jonathan looked at them, these 3 lives who had changed his own. Not with grand gestures, but with small, fierce hope. He thought about all he had lost, his spotless public image, a few business deals, a sister who never understood. But none of it mattered. Not when he looked at the girls and saw who they were becoming. Not when he realized who he had become. And so, as they sat together in the quiet glow of the bread and light cafe, Jonathan Blake understood something he had never grasped in all his years of building empires. That real wealth wasn't in shares or power or accolades. It was in moments like this. In the arms of 3 daughters. In the warmth of fresh bread. And in a place where no child would ever have to pray over garbage again.